Undercover CEO discovers a shocking act of kindness that changes everything. The restaurant was bustling with activity, the aroma of freshly baked bread and sizzling food filling the air. In the corner of the room sat David Harper, the CEO of a highly successful chain of family-owned restaurants. Known for his down-to-earth demeanor despite his vast wealth, David had always taken pride in the reputation of his establishments. Today, however, he wasn't here to meet with executives or discuss business plans. Instead, he had decided to go undercover, dressed in plain clothes, to experience his restaurant from a customer's perspective. David chose a small table near the counter, blending in with the lunch hour crowd. He studied the staff as they worked. Most appeared efficient and friendly, smiling at the customers and chatting warmly with regulars. However, a pair of young boys sitting at the table behind him quickly caught his attention. They looked no older than 10 or 12, their clothes slightly worn, their shoes scuffed, and their hands clasped nervously as they stared at the menu. Their hushed voices carried over to David, who could overhear snippets of their conversation. "Do you think we have enough for even one plate?" one of the boys whispered. The other shook his head, biting his lip. "Maybe we can share a sandwich, but don't let anyone know. They might kick us out." David's heart tightened. It was clear the boys were hungry, their faces pale and their voices tinged with uncertainty. They flipped through the menu, their small fingers tracing the cheapest items. Every now and then, they would glance around the restaurant, as though afraid of being noticed or judged. David leaned slightly closer, trying not to appear intrusive. The boys continued their quiet discussion. "Mom said to save the rest for tomorrow," the younger one said softly. His brother nodded solemnly. "We'll just tell her we weren't that hungry today." David felt a wave of emotions, sadness, compassion, and a tinge of guilt. These children were trying to scrape together enough money for a meal in a restaurant he owned, while he sat comfortably with the power to change their day. Still, he didn't want to intervene just yet. He wanted to observe how his staff would handle this delicate situation. As the boys nervously approached the counter, clutching a few crumpled bills, David decided to watch closely. The next few minutes, he realized, might reveal more about the heart of his restaurant than any profit report ever could. The boys hesitated as they reached the counter, their small hands gripping their meager savings. The cashier, a young woman named Sarah, greeted them with a warm smile. She had been with the restaurant for several years and was known for her kindness. "Hi there. What can I get for you today?" she asked, her voice cheerful and welcoming. The older boy looked down at the money in his hand, his face tense with embarrassment. How much is the cheapest thing you have?" he mumbled, avoiding eye contact. Sarah's smile faltered for a moment as she glanced at their worn-out clothes and anxious expressions. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "Are you boys hungry?" The younger one nodded timidly, his stomach audibly growling. Sarah's expression softened, and she glanced behind her toward the kitchen. "Don't worry about the price," she said gently. "I'll make sure you get something good to eat." The boy's eyes widened in disbelief. "Really?" the older one asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Really," Sarah assured them. "Why don't you take a seat, and I'll bring something out for you." David watched the interaction unfold, deeply moved by Sarah's empathy. As the boys walked back to their table, still in shock from her generosity, Sarah stepped away from the counter and spoke briefly to the kitchen staff. Within minutes, she returned with 2 steaming plates of food, more than the boys could have dreamed of ordering. The older boy hesitated as she set the plates down. We can't pay for all this," he stammered. Sarah knelt down to their level and smiled. "It's on me," she said softly. "Just promise me you'll enjoy it, okay?" The boys' faces lit up, their eyes brimming with gratitude. They immediately dug into their meals, their hunger overtaking their initial shyness. David sat silently, his heart swelling with pride. Sarah's small act of kindness had not only fed 2 hungry children, but also restored their sense of dignity. However, his moment of admiration was interrupted when he overheard a gruff voice from across the room. "What a waste," muttered a man sitting nearby, shaking his head. Why bother helping kids like that? They're just going to grow up and be another problem for society. David turned to see the man scowling at Sarah and the boys. He felt a surge of anger, but held his composure, deciding it was time to step in and see how far his staff would go to stand by their values. David stood up and approached the counter, pretending to be an ordinary customer. As he waited for Sarah to notice him, he observed her carefully, intrigued by how she handled the challenging situation. "Excuse me," David said casually when Sarah turned to him. "I couldn't help but overhear. Do you think it's wise to just give food away for free? Doesn't that hurt the business?" Sarah blinked in surprise, momentarily caught off guard by the question. She quickly regained her composure, offering him the same warm smile she had given the boys. "I believe it's important to help people when they're in need," she said confidently. "Sometimes it's not about the money. It's about doing the right thing." David raised an eyebrow, testing her resolve. "But what if they take advantage of your kindness? Doesn't that make it unfair for paying customers like me?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, then straightened her posture. "I understand your concern, sir," she said earnestly, "but those kids clearly needed help. If I have the opportunity to make someone's day a little brighter, I think it's worth the risk." David nodded slowly, impressed by her sincerity. He was about to respond when the man who had been muttering earlier approached the counter. "This is ridiculous," the man snapped, glaring at Sarah. "You're running a charity, not a restaurant. People like them don't deserve handouts. They need to learn to fend for themselves." Sarah's face flushed, but she remained calm. "Sir, I understand your frustration," she said, her voice steady. "But I believe everyone deserves a little kindness, especially children. They didn't choose their circumstances." The man scoffed, shaking his head. "You're just enabling them," he said before turning and walking away, muttering under his breath. David watched the interaction unfold, his respect for Sarah growing with every word she said. She hadn't wavered in her principles, even when faced with criticism. As the man left, Sarah turned back to David with an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry about that," she said. "Can I get you anything to eat or drink?" David smiled warmly. "Not yet," he said. "But I'd like to know. Do you always go out of your way to help others like this?" Sarah shrugged modestly. "I just do what I think is right," she said. "If I can make a difference, even a small one, it's worth it." David nodded, his decision made. It was time to reveal who he really was and show Sarah how much her actions had meant. David smiled, realizing he couldn't delay any longer. It was time to reveal the truth. He straightened his posture and looked Sarah in the eyes. "Sarah, you probably don't know me," he began, his tone warm yet serious. "But I know everything I need to know about you after today. I'm David Reynolds, the owner of this restaurant chain." Sarah's eyes widened in shock, her mouth opening slightly as she processed his words. "Wait, you're the owner?" she stammered. David nodded. "Yes, and I came here undercover to see how this location was running. What I found was far more than I expected." Sarah took a step back, overwhelmed by the revelation. I didn't know. I'm sorry if I said or did anything wrong," she said nervously. David chuckled softly and shook his head. "On the contrary, you've done everything right. The way you treated those boys, your kindness, and your dedication to helping others, it's exactly what I hope to see in my employees. You've reminded me why I started this business in the first place." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she listened to his words. "Thank you," she whispered. David continued, his tone turning serious again. "But it's not enough to just thank you. I want to do more. Effective immediately, I'm promoting you to general manager of this location, with a significant pay raise. And I'll be setting up a fund to help employees like you make a difference in their communities." Sarah gasped, her hands covering her mouth. "Are you serious? This is incredible. Thank you so much." David smiled warmly. "You've earned it, Sarah, and I'll make sure the whole team knows about the incredible impact you've had. As the news spread across the restaurant, the other employees gathered around, congratulating Sarah and expressing their admiration. The two boys who had received Sarah's kindness watched from a corner, their smiles wide and genuine. Before leaving, David turned to Sarah one last time. Never stop being the person you are. People like you are what make this world a better place. With that, he walked out of the restaurant, leaving Sarah and the rest of the team inspired and determined to continue making a difference. The restaurant thrived under Sarah's leadership, and her story of compassion and integrity became a beacon of hope for everyone who heard it.